we're going to be talking about resilience and how that can happen for someone like Mary Canaday or for any of us at any point in time throughout our lives. That there's something that can happen, and it's already happened to many of us. There have been many, many things that we've been resilient as regards to, but the explanation and comprehension and specific understanding of what that really is has been obscure. And I've discovered what resilience is in essence, the actuality of it. It's not well known. It's very little is known about it as yet, but it will become more and more well known. And I'm here to talk about it briefly for tonight and tomorrow. And I hope you enjoy the message, because I think it's potentially revolutionary and meaningful to any person who can see what their own resilience is in the moment. And we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about the nature of resilience, how it works, and reveal some things that might be new insights for you. I want to take this moment just to weave it back to a time in nursing and in medicine, just to find a kind of parallel, because it's hard at first to get your head around, for me, the importance, and probably for you too, the importance of understanding how something works versus how it doesn't work. That differentiation, that comprehension of a discovery or something new, something profound that had not been known and then became known, is something that we can draw upon to look at resilience in more specificity and more detail. Because if we can discover, as I've discovered what resilience is, as soon as I discovered what it is, I also simultaneously realized what it isn't. And the misunderstanding pulled itself apart from it, so I could see what it was and what it isn't. And that's been very profound for me. And I want to do my best to share it for you, because it will, in my presumption, it would be profound for you too. So, to use that example, let me draw upon one point in history, in nursing and medicine history. In 1847, which I realized it wasn't that long ago, my great-grandparents were alive during this period. But I'm old. For you young ones, it might be your great-great-grandparents, but nevertheless, not that long ago, there was a physician who got a job working in a obstetrics unit delivering babies. And as he began to get his bearings in his new job, his first position as a physician, he ran into a phenomena which was very common in those days, called childbed fever. It was deadly. And 10% of the mothers, can you imagine this? 10% of the mothers that gave birth, that came into the hospital to give birth, left in a coffin. Remarkable to think back that it wasn't that long ago that this was happening. And there was no known understanding of childbed fever. So as he got kind of bedeviled. He was a little Hungarian guy, very short and fiery, had a hot temper. His name was Ignaz Semmelweis. And he got the idea that he wanted to understand what was happening, and a chance conversation happened where he was talking to the lady that directed the midwifery unit, and it happened to be immediately next door. So there was a wall separating the obstetrics unit, medical unit, and the midwifery unit. And every other day, from midnight to midnight, women going into delivery would go to the midwifery unit, and then the next day would go to the medical unit, and so on and so forth. So they were patients who were essentially very cleanly and clearly randomly selected. It turns out, Semmelweis was asking this midwife, he just happened to say, by the way, what's the incidence of childbed fever on your unit? And she said, 1%. And he was like, what? 1%? He says, it's 10% on my unit. And she's like, well, too bad for you guys. Too bad for those mothers. He was bedeviled by this contradiction. And he asked her specific questions like, what's the birth position? How do you treat the mothers? He pored over medical textbooks and found at that point, you go to the medical textbooks, I've seen them, I've summarized them here, but these are some of the things that the medical textbooks at the time said that caused childbed fever. Curdled mother's milk, fear in the mother. So he thought it might be fear, so he thought, how could we be scaring our mothers who are delivering? And he realized that there was, for example, that once a mother came to be known, her symptomatology, her fever rose to a certain point, and they knew she's got childbed fever and she was going to die, they sequestered those mothers to the back ward. The priest came through to deliver last rites, ringing a bell and swinging the incense. And so he thought, maybe we're scaring the healthy mothers and instilling childbed fever in them. So they built a new door for the priest to go around to deliver last rites, so he didn't have to come through the healthy unit. It had no effect on the death rate. He found out about the how roughly male obstetricians delivered, maybe it was in their delivery, how they handled the mothers. Midwives were maybe more gentle. He investigated that to no avail. He looked at other reasons. What was the atmosphere in the hospital? What was the cold? The colds. How do you keep? What should we do about mothers' colds? The more, and so he would do autopsies. They had a tremendous flow of mothers coming in. He would do autopsies every day, every morning. He and a fellow surgeon named Kolechka would gather and do autopsies on the latest batch of dead mothers. And they would do their procedure and then wipe their hands on their aprons and put their scalpels in their pockets and walk right down to the ward and take the scalpels out and deliver babies. They had no idea what was happening, but of course they were the carriers. It wasn't, any of these factors were completely irrelevant to why these mothers were dying. It was one specific thing and not any of these other things. So now you would think that that would be an immediately revolutionary idea, and it was, and is, and still is around, because lo and behold, he had discovered germs. Germs was a factor not only in childbed fever, but in surgical fever. 50% of the surgeries that were done in that time, at that time, were deadly. How many of you have had an operation? A very big portion of this room just raised their hand. 50% of you would have been gone by the infection caused by those surgeries. I'm glad you're all here. So understanding, and just another thought, like I've given you a composite of these slides for you to take home, and they're organized, but kind of follow along with me, because there's a logic that I'm going to be establishing here that essentially will point out, when you fully comprehend how something works and how it doesn't, there can be revolutionary implications. Now, one of the things that happened to Semmelweis that was really interesting, he realized to his horror, here's how it really happens, kind of a little interesting tidbit. So he does autopsies. Kolechka, who's his buddy, fellow surgeon, says to Semmelweis, you know, this childbed fever thing is driving you crazy. You should take a break and go to Vienna. Take some time off. You're poring over this. This has become too big a deal for you. So Semmelweis goes away, doesn't have any relief from this trouble. He's just very troubled by these deaths. He comes back, he goes right back into the autopsy ward. Kolechka isn't there. The attendant comes in, and he asks the attendant, where's Kolechka? I need him to help me with this autopsy. The attendant looks aghast. He says, you don't know? And he says, no, what? What? He says, Kolechka's dead. Oh no, that's terrible. So he's really despondent, and he goes up and reads Kolechka's autopsy, and he notices in a footnote that a few days before, just by happenstance, someone made note that Kolechka was doing an autopsy, and a clumsy medical student had nicked Kolechka in the arm with a scalpel that they were doing the autopsy with. And then he reads the symptomatology that Kolechka died of, and he realized that Kolechka essentially died of childbed fever, and he's a male. So right then, Semmelweis said, there must have been some material on that scalpel, and that was germs. So that simple insight, now it was many, many years before it was accepted that germs even existed. It was 30 years before they had the optics to see a germ, but he knew it by comprehension and insight. He had the insight there was some material on that scalpel. Now that insight may have crossed the minds of people throughout history. Certainly thousands upon thousands of people died, but it sunk in deep enough that it changed Semmelweis's life. But being a fiery little guy, he would, one of the famous incidences, he would stand up at medical meetings and point his finger at fellow surgeons and say, you are a murderer. He was because he could see what was happening. He goes down, once he has this insight, he puts a notice on the wall that says, for surgeons coming from the morgue have to wash their hands and their instruments in this basin of water. He wanted to check out to see if anything could be done about this contamination. So the surgeons said, what? What's this business? It's another nutty hospital procedure. Does this rationale have any resonance to any of you? Another picky thing that they want us to do. We don't have time for that. We're overwhelmed. Our clinical demand we're overwhelmed with it. Okay, they say. We'll delegate it to the nurses to wash the instruments, but we're not washing our hands. That's too much. Well, they suffered from what I'm going to call a mixed paradigm. They didn't understand that washing the instruments and not washing your hands, or not washing the linens, it was just it was the same thing. There was one phenomena, there was one deeper order that was killing people in wounds, in surgeries, and in childbed fever. And he knew specifically what it was. He knew how it happened, and he wouldn't let go of it. Now he caught a lot of grief. He was kicked out, fired from his job, even though within a year he took the death rate down to 1%. But his boss was politically jealous of him, so he fired him. And eventually Semmelweis gave up his whole idea of what he had discovered, fell into kind of obscurity, got a job in a remote town somewhere, and lo and behold, he comes in and sees the same death going on, and it just breaks his heart. He resolves to start all over again, establish these washing procedures, and he shows results again. He wrote a book, and one of the reviewers said it was the worst book he had ever read in medical history, and the most important, because he was it was so difficult for him to express himself. Yet he knew he had something that would change medicine. He ended up dying, actually, of another wound that he received by another clumsy medical student in an autopsy. And he went slowly insane, but he discovered something. He got it published, and things slowly began to change. So I'm just saying, I want to make that point because seeing how that works, we all know now about this world. And none of us, if we would have been in a medical meeting at the time, none of us would have known, and no one would have mentioned it, because it would have been completely invisible to us. And we would have thought about all these other irrelevant causes whenever there was one cause. So taking that example will be important for our conversation about resilience. And I hope to prove it to you why. So what we're going to say is, let me go to the next slide, is that, resilience has been around, and there's a resilience paradigm. So a paradigm is something that's a logic that hasn't quite been comprehended or understood in depth. So finding a deeper logic about resilience is going to render false causes obsolete. It's going to be things that we think resilience are about now, that after this seminar and after this shift, we're going to know, we're going to rule out, we're going to not be confused by. Right now, if you think about resilience, you read books on resilience, there's dozens of them out there. They will all have a common thread that is not actually scientifically verifiable. And I wanted to bring up a few of those. They will talk about overcoming circumstances. The stories of resilience are replete. Difficult circumstances. Person responds in some way that's exemplary or unpredictable, or so it looks like, and the story is told, and sometimes even by them, that they saw, the Nazi person in a concentration camp realized that he had no fear because he had seen his family shot before him, begged to be shot. They said, no, we can use your talents. And for some reason in that moment, he he realized that he saw what hate would do. And he thought, I'm never going to hate another person the rest of my life. That's it. No matter what, I'll never hate. I can't. And because he got this hate out of him, he had a calm mind. And as he went to the concentration camp, his fellow Jews could see that he was fair-minded. He wasn't reactive. He wasn't in the world of taking things personally and scheming and being afraid of people. He wasn't even afraid of the Nazis. And so he became like a focus for the Jewish community, he was like a judge. There were things that it was like a lay wise person. And if there were things that needed to be considered or arrived at, they said, go ask Wild Bill. His name was Wild Bill. He had a big handlebar mustache. So Wild Bill became like a person that, because he had none of this hate or fear in him, he just was not relegated to what everyone else was thinking about. And they could see it. And the Nazis could see it too. So they used Bill as a kind of an intermediary to help them with what they were trying to do. And they were as impressed with Bill as the Jews were. So when they liberated that camp, he had been there 6 years. 6 years in a concentration camp. And he's erect, strong, and the Allies come in, they arrest him because he's obviously a Nazi. Well, and all the Jews say, "Oh no, he's not a Nazi. He's a Polish Jew. He was from Warsaw." And they tell the story, and they have to be convinced because he's healthy. He has a bearing. He has something about him that kept him from such devastation. Because in those days, often when camps were liberated, Jews would leave and go find a gun and just kill every German they could find. I mean, they were so full of hate. He had none of that. So overcoming circumstances, so when I tell that story, you think, way to go, Wild Bill, you're such a strong guy. But what if there's a secret that we haven't really comprehended, a secret that would be accessible to every one of us? And if we knew that secret about resilience, wouldn't we become more resilient? We think that it has to do with maximizing strengths. So when we talk about children or resilience in children, we try to boost them up with programs that give them self-esteem or build up their profile of achievement. I'm not saying these are wrong, but I'm just saying they don't have quite the specificity that I'm going to propose. We try to minimize risk factors. We look at the personalities. We look at the past. Now, it's really interesting when you look at the research on resilience. The severity of traumatic circumstances, just take that case of Wild Bill right there. It's really got nothing to do, there's no kind of critical mass of traumatic circumstances that add up to non-resilience. There's something else going on. So it's not like if a person has few traumatic circumstances, they end up having a wonderful life. We all know that's not true. You can be rich and talented and whatever and live a miserable life, and you can be poor and untalented and be happy as a clam. Lottery winners are not any happier than paraplegics, surprisingly. So we know the data is in that there are no factors in the circumstances of a person's life that determine resilience. Isn't that fascinating? No, there's no frequency. The frequency of traumatic circumstances or the severity of traumatic circumstances is unrelated to resilience. Yet, in our popular culture, anytime we talk about it, we all presume, well, you know, she got really fed up, that girl, and she just had too much and she jumped off the bridge or whatever. I shouldn't make light of such things, but I'm just trying to say there's a deeper order of functioning that is we can now take into account that we couldn't take into account before, but we have to pull away from these mythologies. Look at the data. The data is in, I've got a book somewhere in my library here that reviews over 500 studies, mentions paraplegia, that paraplegics and lottery winners are often, after the event, there's no event that causes resilience. And there's no event that is associated with non-resilience. So you have lottery winners. I've seen a program interviewing groups of lottery winners, and it's really interesting. You might expect them all to be fat and sassy and happy because they're millionaires instantly, one moment in time. They became fabulously wealthy, but in truth, they're about as happy after the event as they were before it. So if they're miserable and complaining and having a difficult time, and then they get fabulously wealthy, and then you measure them a little while later, they show up the same way. The most scientific predictor of how a person does post an event, either traumatic, so-called, or wonderful, like the lottery, is how were they thinking before the event? If they were thinking in a way that is resilient, they will be resilient after the event. If they're paraplegic, they have a momentary, they'll never walk again, and at some point soon, they're going to say, well, this is going to be interesting. I'll see what this is going to be like. So that said, that it's not really there. If we're looking for resilient stories and resilient explanations, and we're looking in the wrong place, we're kind of doing what Semmelweis's colleagues were doing by pointing to the difficulties of the atmosphere in the hospitals, the personality of the mother, the curdled milk. They always blame the mother, don't they? Yeah. You know, that's what my wife says. They always blame the mother. So I'm going to try and break that mythology. Positive thinking, individual differences. This book that I mentioned, sophisticated look at all, and essentially diminishes all these factors, but says, well, I guess it's individual differences. Well, I got so when I read her book, she lived up the road from me. I live in Washington State. She lived up in Vancouver. I called her on the phone. Her name is Marilyn Bowman. And I said, my goodness, you've done all the research for my book. I mean, you've taken aim at every one of these myths and exploded them. And I know why people are resilient. And she said, I want to come talk to you. So I said, great. So she comes down, and we have lunch. And I think I was a little too excited because She was kind of a bookish researcher who'd gotten a grant and just poured over the research and wrote this brilliant essay on what resilience isn't. And then she meets this kind of excitable psychologist who says, I know what it is, and I'm talking to her, and the more urgent I got to get it across, the more she's kind of backing up. Like, I think she had a lot of, I don't know, she probably thought I was another, I don't know, some kind of nut job or something that came her way. And so the further I pushed, the further she held back. And so I didn't get a chance to get it across to her. So she calls it individual differences. But I'm saying that there's an order to the way we all function that is identical. It's not individual differences. That's the same. We all have a similarity of functioning, that we're all equal. And I want to talk about that. So we're going to be looking at a deeper order than differences. And I'm going to suggest there's one obstacle that stands in the way of people becoming more resilient for all of us, that all of us can become more resilient and even more resilient and more resilient still. And there's only one thing that gets in the way of that. And this is a misunderstanding that we all have about how we function, how our functioning works. And I'm going to suggest that we have a great ignorance among us as to how we function, how our psychological functioning works. Is we've got a lot of gray area in. And I'm going to suggest that it's like a mixed paradigm. So, back to my little point that I made about those doctors saying, delegate it to the nurses to wash the instruments and the maids to change the sheets, but we're not washing our hands. That we're all kind of like that doctor, those doctors. We're all we all live in a mixed paradigm. And it's not true. There's something wrong with the way we think about ourselves and the way we think about each other, the way we understand each other. That if we could sort that out and we could get it articulated, get it differentiated as to what is happening and what's not happening, how it works and how it doesn't work, that our resilience quotient will predictably go up and up and up. So this is something that people can have insight about. I'm hoping as we talk here in this day, over the next day, that there'll be some moments of insight that might occur to you, like, well, that's an I never thought of that. So an insight is when something that you thought was true collapses, and you get a fresh view of it. You get a new understanding of it. So something that has, and this has happened to you. You've had many thousands and thousands of insights in your life, but they are key to resilience. And it's not rocket science. That's good, right? I don't like rocket science. I don't know rocket science. This I know. I know how resilience works. It's universally true, universally accessible. People can insightfully realize the specific psychological truth that we're going to be talking about that collapses this obstacle. As this more and more falls away, we'll have the chance to live a life that is more compassionate and loving, less judgmental and critical, because that's not going to make sense to you, or less and less it's going to make sense to you. And more efficient, effective, and resilient. Sounds like a big fat promise, doesn't it? I hope to make good on it. What is this deeper order of resilience about? It's how thought works. It's about the nature of thought, not good thinking, bad thinking, or more positive thinking, or healthy thinking. It's not about that. It's about how thought itself works. You guys doing okay? Oh, yeah, we still got half an hour, right? That's great. I'm kind of rushing along. I hope I'm not going too fast. You guys doing okay? So let's take a look just for a few moments here and try to hear what I'm saying about thought, because one of the problems when people hear the word thought, they think of it as what they think or what they've thought in the past, or they think of it as something, a specific idea or belief or a memory or an opinion, a judgment. There's something specific about, when I say the word thought, you'll tend to go to a thing. And I want you to think about it in a different way, just for while we're here today and tomorrow. I want you to think of it as more like a power that you put your thinking into. So it's like a pool, you might say, that's a quiet pool that everybody has, and you drop thinking into it, and experience comes out of it. So like and then when I say experience comes out of that, I'm saying there is no feeling without thought. There's no reality without thought. There's no nothing happens in your experience without the power of thought. The power of thought is a gift. It's not, you didn't create it. It's like something that's already there, and you've been putting things into it since you were born, and what you get out of the other end of it is feeling, experience. And it's easy to forget that thought is that kind of medium. It's the medium through which we experience life. So I'm asking you to think about it in a new way, in a more universal way, in a bigger way, as something that is there all the time and has everything to do with everything. That there's no power greater than it psychologically. So it's not what you think. It's that thought happens. That thought is the basis of experience. And this is really important, because this thought, as I'm proposing it, is the heart of the resilience paradigm. If you can see thought as how I'm proposing it, that, because here's what your mind does. So mind, these are all going to be different ways of talking about your mind. That your mind is not brain. Your mind is not a thing. It's not a thought. It's a force that acts as a catalyst. And when I say catalyst, I once went to the hardware store and I needed a glue. And I said to the hardware guy, I said, I need some glue and it's got to be really good. It's got to glue something really solid. And what do you got? He said, best glue I've got is in this little packet right here. And I thought, you got to be kidding. Glue's got to be in a squeeze bottle or something, you know, like it's this little packet. It's about this big. And it's got a little membrane in it, and it's kind of a clear liquid on one side and a little bit of a tinted yellow liquid on the other. I said, this is the glue. He says, this is the best glue. He says, what you do is you bust that membrane. She says, on one side is the glue, and the other side is the catalyst. And that catalyst acts on that inert glue, and it turns it hot. And you bust that membrane, roll it in your hands, do like that. You snip the corner off it. Don't get it on your fingers, because it'll weld your fingers together. Put it on what you're trying to glue, it'll just do it. It's just great, and it bonds it, the heat. So the mind acts as a catalyst. The mind is like a catalyst. It acts as this catalyst and turns your thought, whether you're conscious of it or not. And most of our thinking is not conscious. It's just, we don't know what we're thinking much of the time. My wife tells a story that she was driving to Seattle. We live north of Seattle, and she says, I was driving and suddenly I felt more anxious than I've ever felt in my entire life. Just wham. She said, it really almost, he said, I almost had to just pull off the side of the road. I could hardly breathe. And I thought, what in the world is happening? It must be a wreck is headed my way. She looks out in front of her. She sees no car coming down the wrong way on the highway. Quick glance to the side, mirrors, nothing happening to the side of her, nothing happening behind her. She thinks it must be the car. The car's about to explode. She looks at the car. She could find no evidence of anything happening that would determine this level of anxiety. And then she remembers what we talk about, because we talk about this paradigm all the time. She said, I knew I had to think myself here. I knew that this couldn't have come to me through any other means other than thought. It had to come from thought. I know that. And then she thought, what was I thinking? She said, well, I've been on the road for an hour. She says, who knows what you think about on an hour's drive, right? How many thoughts do you have on an hour's drive? 10,000? I don't know. I mean, you have a lot of thinking. She said, I have no idea what I was thinking. And to this day, she doesn't have any idea. But because she knew that all her feeling, positive or negative, was based in thought, it did something for her. She had an insight. And it allowed her to continue on. And it abated her anxiety. It made the anxiety dissipate. And but she remembered it because it was such a dramatic example. So that would have been what I mean by unconscious thought. Your mind acts as a catalyst and turns your thought, whether conscious or unconscious. You with me here? Into the reality you now see. So I'm saying there's a process going on in all of us all the time that takes our thought and activates it into experience. And that's happening for everybody on the planet all the time. And you can't stop it. But understanding that how that works, and that there's a point of origin about that will do something, because here's where resilience, here's where the barrier, well, let me make sure I'm not getting ahead of myself. It's easy to forget that thought is the medium through which we experience life. It's the invisible player that, when included, sheds tremendous new light that removes false barriers to resilience. Thought is the constant in this paradigm. So as a constant, we have to include all thought. So when I'm saying all thought, I mean the best thought, the wisest thought, the most transcendent thought, the most beautiful thought, the most incredible thought you've ever thought, you ever thunk, to the most disgusting, weird, horrible, disastrous, selfish, dysfunctional thought. All thought. We have to unify thought. We have to keep it whole. So we have to put it back together. We have to keep it as a totality, as an element of our experience, not as as an element. It can't be ruled out. It can't be taken. There's no place. It's irreducible, and you can't have experience without that. That's a fundamental aspect, a fundamental nature to reality. So the feeling of thought, the attitude of thought, the experience of thought. So I'm thinking right now, y'all are thinking, whatever that attitude is, like this really helped me. For example, I was telling someone today that my mom used to say to me, all the time, she used to say, you'd argue with a fence post. That was her favorite thing she'd said to me. And I thought, I was kind of proud of that, actually. I thought, yeah, you're not going to sell me a bill of goods. I'm going to, don't take any wood nickels. There was sort of like this skepticism, and I like to kind of push back and see what's what. And I didn't realize, essentially, she was complaining that I was hard-headed, and she could see it. So I was hard-headed a lot, and my wife could see it, and she thought, well, he's a pretty nice guy otherwise, so his hard-headedness is just sort of, what can you do? What can you do about a person's hard-headedness? Well, one day I'm thinking about this resilience thing, and I'm realizing, well, wait a minute, my stubbornness must be a feeling. And I thought, whoa, oh yeah, I see stubbornness all the time. Like I feel stubborn about this, and stubborn about that, and stubborn about this relationship, and stubborn about that. And I started to realize I was living in a world of stubbornness. And I had no idea that it was unconscious thought. I thought it was something else. I didn't get where that feeling was coming from. So the experience was right there, it was tangible. And all my friends could see it. And I was completely oblivious to it. It was like, the old adage about a fish in water. If you interview a fish and say, how's the water? The fish will say, what's water? What are you talking about, water? Like, fish wouldn't know what not water was. Well, I wouldn't know what not stubborn was. And I discovered it. I discovered the liberation from not feeling stubborn. And you know what? I'm thrilled. I feel like I've been let out of jail. It was no picnic being in stubborn jail. It's like I can really listen. I can really experience things in a deeper way. I was that was one of my obstacles. There are many obstacles, but there's one nature to it. It's thought that doesn't look like, it's feeling that doesn't look like thought. There's feeling in your life, I guarantee you there's probably a bunch of it. It doesn't look like thought. And it's keeping you from being more resilient. So we're saying resilience is not being bound by circumstances or the past. And we're going to talk about what that means. We're going to be using a deeper, what I call a deeper discriminator, like Semmelweis used with all those other false causes. He realized, well, it's not fear. We put a new door in to get the priest to go around, and it didn't do anything. It's not fear. We don't know what it is yet. It's not curdled milk. Curdled milk was after the infection had already happened and the woman was starting to die. It's not these other things. He was picking them off. But he didn't know what it was, but he was ruling out what it wasn't. And once you see what resilience is, you're going to rule out what it isn't. And you're going to be shocked at what you think is important and necessary and hanging around your head that you don't need. Like, you know how they always talk about a quiet mind is a deeper mind, is a more peaceful mind, is a wiser mind. And we've seen that in research, we know that now. But what keeps our mind from being wiser and deeper is unnecessary, reactive, judgmental thinking. And we have a ton of it. And it ain't doing us any good. And I'd like for you to get some idea from this day that you could get a bead on that and get a discriminator implanted in you that would sort out your own dysfunction, your own thinking. It would allow you to have a deeper discriminator of how your system really works already. I'm not trying to tell you that you should do anything about this. It's already working the way it's working. But if you knew more and deeper how it worked, that discriminator would kick in and start throwing out garbage, and you would be better off for it. So just sorting out how something works and how something doesn't work is what we're going to be talking about tomorrow. And that, we propose, is life-changing because it will do something to take thinking out now that you feel really, it's kind of gotten glommed onto you. And it looks like it really has something to do with something, and it's just not doing you any favors. So we're going to put thought back together, think of it as a totality, and somehow we've separated thought. We've come to the idea that thought is separatable from life. That there's some things that aren't thought, some feelings that aren't thought. And if you put it back together again and start taking another look at all your feelings as thought, your discriminator is going to kick in and going to do some really heavy lifting for you and improve your functioning. So you don't have to change anything. You just have to quit making an ancient mistake. We've all made an ancient mistake a separating thought from feeling and paying dearly for it. So it doesn't look right now to be as big a deal. I mean, I've already said it, but I guarantee you it'll change your life. Money back. That's pretty good, right? Money back. You see Lynn, if you don't get your results, you just say, Lynn, I didn't get the results, I want my money back. But we want you to give it a try. We'll have to coach her and say, did you give it a try? Well, I don't know, I didn't really. No, if you see what we're saying, there's going to be, insightfully, there's going to be something removed that you don't need. So see what you could see, and tomorrow morning we'll jump into it and get down to some particulars and see what we can co-discover, okay? And it'll be transformational, I hope. Okay? All right. Thank you. Thank you for your attention, and you're so rapt, such a good group.